The Druids, the enigmatic religious leaders of Celtic Britain, were central figures in the spiritual and social lives of ancient Britons. They served as priests, scholars, judges, and advisors to tribal chieftains, embodying a unique synthesis of political authority and spiritual wisdom. For centuries, they upheld traditions, oral histories, and rituals that defined Celtic culture. However, the arrival of the Roman Empire in Britain marked the beginning of the end for the Druids. Through a combination of military conquest, religious suppression, and cultural assimilation, the Druids were systematically dismantled, leaving a legacy that still echoes faintly in modern British culture. The Druids occupied a privileged position in Celtic society, functioning as intermediaries between humans and the divine. They were not a priesthood in the sense of a centralized religious institution. Rather, they were an intellectual class deeply rooted in oral tradition. Druids were believed to possess profound knowledge of astronomy, medicine, law, and spirituality. They conducted sacred ceremonies in groves of oak trees, which were revered as symbols of endurance and wisdom. Key to their role was the oral preservation of cultural memory. Druids eschewed written records, fearing that the sacred knowledge might be misinterpreted or misused if committed to writing. Instead, they relied on a rigorous system of oral transmission, requiring years of training to memorize law, laws, and histories. This oral tradition would ultimately be a double-edged sword, as it made their teachings vulnerable to erasure when their society fell under Roman rule. The downfall of the Druids can be traced to the Roman conquest of Britain, initiated in 43 AD under Emperor Claudius. The Romans, who viewed the Druids as both a political and spiritual threat, systematically worked to eradicate their influence. To the Romans, the Druids represented a dangerous mix of barbarism and rebellion. They were seen as the ideological backbone of Celtic resistance to Roman rule, inspiring tribal leaders to defy the imperial agenda. Roman writers such as Julius Caesar, Tacitus, and Pliny the Elder painted the Druids as practitioners of dark and archaic rituals, including human sacrifice. While these accounts may have been exaggerated to justify the Roman suppression of Druidic practices, they reveal the extent to which the Romans feared the Druids as a unifying force among the Britons. The turning point in the destruction of the Druids came in 60 AD during the governorship of Gaius Suetonius Paulinus. Suetonius launched a campaign against the island of Mona, modern-day Anglesey, a stronghold of Druidic activity off the coast of Wales. Mona was not only a sacred site but also a centre of resistance, providing sanctuary to refugees from Roman persecution. According to Tacitus, Suetonius's forces encountered a formidable scene on the shores of Mona. Druids and warriors stood in defiance, women clad in black wailed curses, and sacred fires blazed. Despite the psychological impact of this dramatic display, the Roman legions crushed the defenders and destroyed the groves, altars, and sacred spaces of the Druids. The fall of Mona signified the physical and symbolic dismemberment of Druidic power. The Romans implemented policies to suppress Druidism across the rest of Britain. Temples to Roman deities replaced Druidic groves, and the Latin language supplanted the Celtic tongue in administrative and religious contexts. Over time, the imposition of Roman law and governance eroded the social structures that supported the Druids' authority. The destruction of their oral tradition was particularly devastating. Without a written record, much of their knowledge disappeared, surviving only in fragmented accounts from Roman historians and later Christian monks. The advent of Christianity in Britain dealt the final blow to Druidic traditions. By the 4th century AD, Christianity had become the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, and it spread to Britain with the support of Roman officials. Unlike the Romans, who had incorporated aspects of Celtic religion into their pantheon, early Christians viewed the Druids as pagan heretics whose practices needed to be eradicated. Christian missionaries condemned the Druids' association with nature worship and their alleged practice of human sacrifice. Churches were often built atop former Druidic sites, both as a symbolic assertion of Christian dominance and as a practical means of co-opting pre-existing centers of spiritual significance. By the early medieval period, Druidism had largely faded from British society, surviving only as a shadowy memory in folklore. While the Druids disappeared as a social and religious institution, their influence persisted in subtle and enduring ways. The Druids became mythologized in British folklore and literature, often depicted as wise magicians or guardians of ancient secrets. Figures like Merlin in Arthurian legend embody Druidic traits, blending Celtic mysticism with medieval Christian themes. These stories kept the memory of the Druids alive, albeit in a romanticized and fictionalized form. Many ancient Druidic sites continued to hold spiritual or cultural significance long after the Druids themselves vanished. Stone circles such as Stonehenge, while predating the Druids, became associated with their mystical practices in popular imagination. Modern-day place names like Druids Hill or Druids Grove also attest to the lasting impression of the Druids on the British landscape. The Druidic legacy saw a revival in the 18th and 19th centuries as romantic and nationalist movements sought to reclaim Britain's ancient heritage. Writers and antiquarians such as William Stukeley reimagined the Druids as noble custodians of wisdom and nature. This romanticized view of the Druids influenced modern Druidic organizations, which emerged in the late 19th century and continue to practice nature-based spirituality today. In a broader sense, the Druids' reverence for nature and their role as preservers of oral tradition resonate with contemporary values. The environmental movement often draws inspiration from the Druids' symbolic connection to the natural world, while the emphasis on storytelling as a cultural practice echoes their oral traditions. The last days of the Druids in Britain marked the end of an era and the beginning of profound cultural transformation. Their decline was driven by the forces of Roman conquest, religious persecution and cultural assimilation, culminating in their near-total erasure from history. Yet, the Druids' influence endures, woven into the fabric of British folklore, literature, and cultural identity. Their legacy serves as a reminder of the resilience of cultural memory, even in the face of overwhelming suppression. In many ways, the story of the Druids mirrors the broader history of Britain itself, a tapestry of conquest and continuity, loss and renewal.